So many people come to me and they say, I don't want to learn to draw, I want to learn to paint. I don't want to draw, I don't want to draw, I want to paint, I want to paint, I want to learn to paint. If you don't want to learn to draw, quit making outlines. So the reality is most people, they just don't want to learn to draw well. They want to be able to paint well, but they don't want to draw well. Ooh, we're going to have fun today. Welcome back to another episode of the Wet Pastellas. Today's episode is for all artists, not just pastellas. A question that a lot of my students have and is of great debate among the artists. Can you become a good painter without learning to draw? I think you'll be surprised at the answer. Many of you may not be satisfied with the answer, or you may disagree. You can take a look at my fermentation wall here, and you can see that I am trying to paint on the verge of abstraction. I have to be able to convince you that some of these are tree shapes. I have to convince you that some of these buildings and some of these skylines are skies, because I'm not going completely to abstraction. Occasionally a painting will tell me, like this painting here told me it wanted to go to abstraction. The one above is pretty close to abstract, but you can still tell that it is a line of trees and a sky in a foreground. This was another fun painting that started out as a landscape but went abstract. Over the years, my study of trees prepared me to begin to make trees semi-abstract. I think had I not learned to draw trees, it would have been a more difficult journey. But that's going to be a journey you're going to have to decide. Are you going to go that abstract? For months now, I've been wanting to do a video series basically on how to paint rather than how to draw. So many people come to me and they say, I don't want to learn to draw, I want to learn to paint. Can it be done? Yes, it can be. Here are the basic shapes. And depending on who you consult, the basic shapes will vary. Some people will say you have the triangle shape, the square shape, and the circle. And from those come the conical shapes, like this. And from the circle comes the sphere. And from the square comes the rectangle of many different shapes, or the cube and rectangular shapes. And from the triangle also comes the pyramid. The cylinder comes from sphere. Depending on who you consult, it doesn't matter. It's good to at least know those basic shapes and be able to draw them somewhat well. Let's take the difference between drawing and painting. Painting, we are making broad strokes. We are making strokes that are not lines, where in drawing so many times, we're making lines. We want to make a cube. We have different ways to do this. We have different skill set to do it. But when we want to paint something that's square, it's just a matter of using broad strokes, and maybe many broad strokes, to create that same square but create a volume. So learning how to control the paint and learning how to control a pencil to draw, there I'm combining the painting and the drawing. So it's a combination of both. But again, comes the question, can we do this without learning to draw? I love to draw. So many of my students in workshops, it's like, I don't want to draw, I don't want to draw, I want to paint, I want to paint, I want to learn to paint. For them, painting is learning to mix colors and discern values and create something that resembles what they have in their head. So many of them, though, who want to learn to paint rather than draw, the first thing they'll do if they're wanting to draw a house is basically, or a barn, is they're drawing it out and then they're coloring it in. Cool colors on one side, Some warm colors on another side, maybe a little middle tone, some shadows. They tell me that they want to paint, but the first thing they do is start drawing. So what I would recommend, if you are saying you want to paint instead of draw, is you stop thinking in terms of lines and think in terms of what your paintbrush or side of a pastel can do. And if you're wanting to do a building, think in terms of looking at that building and creating shapes that make that building. And by changing your colors and your values, you're not drawing a building, you're painting a building. If you're wanting to paint, then you have to be able to think in terms of shapes. I would contend that you have to basically know your basic shapes in order to be able to paint them. So it doesn't mean you have to draw these shapes. If you don't want to learn to draw, quit making outlines. Start making strokes in your drawings. Landscapes that come across, groupings of trees, cool shadows, warm skies, and if I had other colors here I could make green grass and blue skies. So the reality is most people, they just don't want to learn to draw well. They want to be able to paint well, but they don't want to draw well. And I would say that's fine. If you don't want to, then I would say don't learn to draw, but force yourself to stop making, trees and the branches come out and then fill in those things with paint. Stop doing outlines. Start thinking in terms of larger shapes and warm and cool in order to make your argument and in order to do the kind of painting that you want to do. I still would recommend everybody learn how to do drawings and do the best drawings that you can. Take everyday objects that resemble the basic shapes. Like, let's take a coffee cup. Anything that's got a similar shape to one of the basic shapes, and you'll quickly learn to find the highlights and where the middle tones are and the specular highlights and the reflection in here, the reflection in the shadows, the proximity shadows. Anytime you can set something up and draw from life, it's going to help your painting. Put some light on the coffee cup, and what do we have? A coffee cup basically is a cylinder. If it's a coffee cup that has an equal top and bottom, and different coffee cups have different handles, but basically you're drawing a cylinder. And then by observing, you'll learn to shade in. Charcoal is a great tool to do this with. You can shade in areas and you can follow the shadows by observation. And I could spend an hour easy drawing this coffee cup and draw it very well with pencil and charcoal. But again, I want to paint. You want to paint. So how do we do that? By observation of the real thing, and by doing plein air paintings outside if you're a landscape artist, by doing figurative drawings, sketching parties with friends. We can learn enough drawing skills that we can combine with our painting skills. Anybody that's followed me for a while has seen how I will often use charcoal and create a grayscale value study, and then cover it up with colors. And those value studies can be as detailed or they can be as rough as you want, because in painting we're doing underpaintings. by layering paint in with the edges and the points of paintbrushes, you're able to create some of those areas of interest. So it's a great help if you learn to not only paint shapes, but also to be able to draw within that shape when you need to. And from those sharp edges, you can come out and create blurred edges. I believe drawing is essential to what we do as painters, but I can't convince my students of that. I think maybe we haven't really necessarily answered the question for everybody, can you paint without learning to draw? But I think the simple answer is yes. And I'll spend hours on drawings that nobody ever sees, because basically I'm enjoying the process of drawing and it's relaxing. Another way to look at it is that the more you paint, the more you'll learn drawing. Because you'll run into situations like this, that if you haven't observed this and trying to paint it, at some point you will observe it. You'll have to use paints in order to create the effects that you want. So in a way you can paint without knowing how to draw, but once you start painting, you'll also learn to draw. And the more you observe, the better off you'll be there too. So that's another way to look at it. I would contend you would have to be able to draw some of those lines pretty accurately in order to be convincing. The same is true if your subject is something very recognizable like boats and cars sitting on city streets. And while there are some shortcuts to do people in the distance, they're often known as carrot people, being able to understand perspective, all those things are drawing skills that you have to decide how close and how accurate you want your pictures to be. Or am I going to learn to do a little bit of both? And that's my recommendation. Learn to do a little bit of both. I think that gives you an idea of the challenges to answering this question and that awful, awful answer of it depends. Well, hopefully that quick little sketch and painting demonstration gave you an idea of what to explore as you try to answer that question for yourself. As you can see, there's no one answer, and sometimes there aren't any. Maybe I created more questions than answers with that one, but it was a quick little demo to show you what the differences between drawing are and painting. And if you want to become a good painter without drawing, there's some things you have to think about. At least think about them. Next week I'll have another video on art and probably pastel. Time to get back to the pastelist in our life. Okay, so until next time, bye-bye everybody. Happy painting.